Hey everybody. So this last weekend, I went to the Mystic Brunch at Donovan's in Minneapolis, and it was amazing. But it really got me thinking of Omnism as a whole. I have a very omnistic practice, and I don't know if people really fully know what that means. And I thought maybe I would just kind of explain it in more detail today. I think there are a lot of people under the belief that, omnism is like going to a spiritual buffet, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But let me break it down. First, I want to talk about the Mystic Brunch. I thought it was very cool. Beautiful place, good food, good staff, but you have basically this rotation, table to table. You had a runic reader, a palmist, an astrologist, and an oracle tarot reader, and they each had very different practices, and they kind of rotated from each table. They spent maybe 5 minutes per table, just doing these kind of mini readings. And I thought it was really neat because it was blending a lot of different belief systems, a lot of different divinatory systems, and it's very omnistic, right? And by the way, I wore my tarot boots. I'm going to put a video and pictures on screen because holy cow, I got so many compliments, complications, yes, in trying to walk with them. It was complicated at first, but I love those boots. I think the brand is, because I posted pictures on another social, and somebody was asking me, it was horoscopes with a Z, and I bought those like 13 years ago. I actually bought them for Madison, and when I was just down in Racine recently, I found them in storage and brought them back with me, and it was the first time I wore them. So exciting. Anyway, these boots are to die for. But let's get back to my omnistic talk. I even made notes to make sure I stayed on track because you guys look at me. I'm Aspergering already. All right, so what is omnism? So it kind of encompasses a couple of different things. It encompasses, number one, pluralism or pluralists, which basically are people who accept many different religious truths across all kinds of belief platforms. It involves many gods, basically. Then you have, and I'm using this term loosely, pantheists. Now, pantheists see the divine in many forms across many traditions as well. You have syncretists. Okay, this blends beliefs from multiple religions, right? Including many, many deities. So these are all kind of, I want to say, bubbled into omnism. So some of the descriptions or the phrases you'll hear in omnism is like multi-faith polytheistic work or multi-faith polytheist people, spiritually inclusive polytheistics, interfaith polytheistics. So these are some of the terms that you'll hear kind of umbrellaed into omnism if you're working with somebody like me that has a very omnistic practice. So in this practice, what you're going to find basically is you're honoring gods from multiple pantheons, right? So Greek, Norse, Hindu, you are respecting all religious paths, all spiritual, pathways as valid, while kind of personally worshiping many different types of deities from these different pantheons. You draw really from different traditions without really feeling bound to just one. So those are kind of the key takeaways of omnistic work. I don't think there's a single perfect word that really captures all these qualities at once, right? Which is why most people just kind of refer to themselves as omnis or polytheistics or omnistic polytheistics. It doesn't, there's not one word that really includes all of this, right? So that's the word you're going to hear the catchphrase most of the time. So I think this combination is actually fairly common nowadays. It's more common than it was certainly 10 years ago in different pagan and spiritual communities. So that's huge, right? So I think it tends to foster like genuine curiosity and respect towards other cultures and traditions, right? That's one great benefit of this practice. I think it also avoids the my God is the only true God tension that's really historically kind of driven a lot of conflict in the world. I think there's also like an intellectual humility almost in saying that the truth is bigger than any one tradition. Think about that. Chew on that for a minute. So I think there are some philosophical tensions when we talk about omnism. And I think it's, some religions make very mutually exclusive claims, especially here in the United States. I mean, there are other parts of the world, but their God is the only God, right? And they actively reject other gods or the belief in other gods. And as an omnist, you have to kind of grapple with whether you can really accept a tradition that rejects that framework, right? Because that's not how you're going to practice. So that's, one philosophical tension with omnism. I think polytheism across pantheons raises questions, right? So, like, one of the examples I like to use is like Zeus and Odin are really good examples. Like, are they separate beings? Are they the same archetype? Are they something else entirely, right? So, like, in omnism, we do look at interconnectivity, and sometimes we'll worship this one energetic entity with many different names. Zeus, Odin, it's all the same energy, the same entity. And so we're kind of hodgepodging a couple of different belief systems because we're recognizing that deity is being multifaceted energetically. I hope that makes sense, right? That depending on what part of the world you're in, how you were raised, your belief structure and system, that the reflection of that deity may have a different name or a different flavor, but it's the same deity. I hope that makes sense, right? Anyways, so that's an example I like to use. I made sure I wrote that on my notes so I could use it. I think people argue that a lot of time, and I hate even saying this, but when all traditions are sacred, right? But we go back to that spiritual buffet comment, and I think people get lost in the idea that these belief systems kind of lose their depth when we combine them together and we're not committing fully to just one path. But if you think about it, like many ancient cultures were very comfortable in borrowing and hodgepodging and blending gods from neighboring religions. The Romans did this famously, right? But even in modern frameworks. So I think that theological frameworks right now today, like perennial philosophy, for example, this really makes a very serious academic case for something like omnism, right? It is that blending that makes more sense than the singular pathway. Anyways, I think belief systems are worth evaluating based on how they shape your character, right? Your character and your relationship with the world. So if we're using that as the measuring tool here, I think that as long as you're genuinely thoughtful and open-hearted and moving through life that way, I mean, do what moves you, right? But I think omnism keeps the flavor open for people to kind of test the waters in different rivers, right? Does that make sense? Anyways, let's go back to the spiritual buffet thing. I keep coming back to that in my brain, so let's talk about it a little bit more. So this really suggests that an omnist or a polytheistic might be picking only the comfortable or appealing parts of each tradition, right? The beautiful rituals, the interesting mythology, the resonant wisdom, right? And we're kind of quietly setting aside like the more demanding, uncomfortable, or contradictory parts of these belief systems and structures. So, you see individuals, they take a little bit of Norse, a little bit of that Hindu devotion, a little bit of that Greek philosophical theology. They kind of hodgepodge it and they leave behind like the strict codes, the sacrifice, the community obligations. Those do need to be considered, right? We can't skip the hard parts, right? So that is something that happens, unfortunately, but not every practice is going to leave out the hard parts, you guys. Be open to that. I think that most religious traditions have been designed as complete systems, and the hard parts and the beautiful parts are intentionally linked together, right? They are very intentionally linked. So like a Buddhist might say the discipline and the peace are inseparable, is the example that I wanted to make sure I mentioned. The other example was like a devout Catholic might say the sacraments only make sense within the full structure of the faith. So when we're extracting pieces in isolation, right, we might dilute or even distort what makes them meaningful in the first place. Now, the counter argument for that really is that almost every single major religion is itself a historical buffet. It really is. Christianity, absorbed Greek philosophy, Roman customs, Hebrew tradition, right? In Islam synthesized multiple regional beliefs. Hinduism is famously pluralistic in its origins. So, the counter argument stands. Depth doesn't require exclusivity, I guess, is the main counter argument to this. And that's because someone can develop a genuinely profound relationship with multiple deities or traditions over a lifetime. The buffet metaphor assumes there's only one correct meal, right? And which itself is kind of a theological assumption. It's not a neutral observation. So I think that discredits it right there, right? So if we're looking at the honest middle ground here, I think that the difference between a very shallow spiritual buffet and a very rich omnistic practice probably comes down to intention. At least it does with my practice. Whether you're engaging in traditions with genuine study and respect, or if you're just harvesting the aesthetics of it. So it is intention based. I think, what's even more interesting is that the buffet framing really kind of reveals this very Western, very modern anxiety about authenticity and commitment, which is pretty new. The assumption that depth requires exclusivity is itself a culturally specific idea, right? Heavily shaped by monotheistic traditions that dominate Western history. So we're choosing one God, and one faith was a very serious identity defining act. So in other parts of the world, layering beliefs is just normal. Okay, this is a Western thing. A person in ancient Japan, for example, we'll use this example, I wrote it down. They probably practice Shinto at home. I keep getting cut off, but so in ancient Japan, a person probably is going to practice Shinto at home, Buddhist rites at a funeral, Confucian ethics in their professional life, right? And there's no sense of contradiction there or shallowness. That's just the way it is. The buffet would have seemed like a perfectly dignified meal to that individual. So, you need to look at it outside of a monotheistic lens, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you are drawn to omnistic polytheism, you're probably closer to how most humans throughout history have related to the divine, honestly. It's kind of the rigid either or framework that's kind of the historical outlier here. So I think that's something to sit with. And it made me think about it yesterday when I was at this mystic brunch. It just, having all these different people from all these different kind of belief systems there intermingling, visiting with people, presenting different ideas. I thought that was great. I think that's amazing. But it also made me think, I do the same thing. I'm very omnistic. I hodgepodge and blend lots of different traditions and belief systems. And I don't know, on my website, I try to kind of write about it a little bit. I don't know if I do a great job at explaining it, but I thought I would jump on today, number one, because I wanted to show off my boots. Because look at how awesome those fucking boots are. And number two, I thought maybe I would explain this a little bit more. Plus, I'm hearing more and more about these spiritual buffet comments online, which is, it is what it is. It's the internet, whatever. But anyway, that is it for today. You guys stay magical, and I'll talk to you soon.